This podcast is brought to you by Gridiron Heroics Media.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Gridiron Heroics Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean, and today we are here to recap the Week 11 of NFL football with Kyron Samuels, former offensive lineman in the Division I of NCAA, and all AFL offensive lineman too. Kyron, how you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good.
All right, so it's a slightly abridged show just because, yes, I didn't get up as early as I would have liked. It would have been nice to get up and do all of the recapping that I wanted to, watch all the games, get all the details. We're going to abridge it just a little bit. Kyron, tell me, you're about the same age as me, right? I'm 32. You're getting right up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is this a phenomenon that just happens with age, or is it something that happens with kids? Because ever since I've had kids, the moment I lay down horizontally in any way, shape, or form, I'm out. Like in seconds. There is zero crossover from laying down to chilling to sleeping. It's done. So I did not set my alarm last night. Is that something that happens to you, or is this just once you're burned out from being a parent?
Hey, so I don't have kids yet, so I can't necessarily answer it the same.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit just with age, man. Like the days just run together. Like time is just a flat circle. Like nothing seems real anymore. Like I feel like I just went to sleep 5 minutes ago, and now I'm up doing this, and it's like there'll be something else at 1 o'clock after this. It's just everything just meshes together.
Yeah, I feel you.
All right, I understand that for sure.
So it's a good show today, man. We've got you here to help me recap. I don't know what's going on with my camera angle, but got you here to help me recap some of our key talking points for the weekend. And then we're going to have Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus to recap the college football weekend that was. And then for our final 30 minutes, we have George Bremer of the Herald Bulletin on to talk about the Colts and what's going on with their organization. And I just thought this was a really interesting time to talk about that because he's going to have some deeper insight for us. I know you have some takes about the hiring of Jeff Saturday. I have some takes about the hiring of Jeff Saturday. They're not necessarily the standard take for NFL media. And so I just kind of wanted to have a longer conversation than we have about that, especially considering what it's looked like since that all took place.
Right.
But getting into the NFL weekend that was, the first thing we're going to talk about here are the Washington Commanders. Are they getting frisky? What are the chances that they make the playoffs? I mean, they just keep winning, and there's no Carson Wentz in at quarterback. So, yeah, it was Houston this weekend. It was. Maybe not the biggest challenge in the world, but you did pick the Houston Texans to win that game, or at least cover, I think. And the Commanders went in and took care of business. They're pretty deep on the defensive line. Maybe not as deep as others, but their top-end talent's great. They will be getting Chase Young back someday. And they've got a lot of skill players, and their offensive line is viable. And so I think really the question is quarterback, and that's been enough over the past few weeks. So what are your thoughts on the Commanders right now? Not necessarily just on the game yesterday, but their season prospects as a whole.
Well, I don't really have much to say about the game yesterday. The game yesterday went about as normal, logical people would expect it to. I just felt like I was just playing the law of averages there with that pick. Like I was expecting the Texans to be just a little bit better than they were, but Texans just are a very bad football team, and you just can't. I mean, they can't get anything going offensively. Their defense isn't bad. They gave up some explosive plays, but they actually held fairly well for the most part. The offense had plenty of opportunity to close that game out and even take a lead. But I want to talk about for a second the way they have been winning. So I'm not the person that discredits winning, like the Minnesota Vikings, even the Buffalo Bills earlier in the year. Everybody's like, oh, they're winning. They'll find ways to win. That's important. But the way you win says a lot about who you are as a team and your identity. And the way they have been winning isn't necessarily conducive to being sustainable. They squeaked out a 5-point win over the Bears. They scored 12 points. Scoring 12 points and winning is not sustainable. They squeaked out a 2-point win over the Green Bay Packers. Not really sustainable. Like the 17-16 win over the Colts, they're not producing enough offense against the solid to good teams for me to take them too seriously down the stretch. They got the Falcons coming up, which means they're going to have to score points because if the Falcons don't do anything else, they're going to score points. They're pretty efficient offense. They have a lot of weapons on, depending on how Kyle pitches. That could be a major curveball for that offense. But other than that, they still have Drake London. Cordell Patterson is playing out of his mind right now. They just have a lot of guys that complement each other. At the very least, they're going to have to score points to win that game. Then you got the Giants twice. You got the 49ers. You got the Browns, who they will score points. Their run game is probably the best in the NFL. And then you got the Cowboys to finish off the year. They got a lot of tough defenses that they're going to play. They got a lot of tough run games they're going to play from here on out. So I don't necessarily know if I would take them to make a playoff. I think they lose at least 3 of these last 5 games. That's just the way I see it shaking out. I don't think that they're physical enough on offense to get it done. They're running the ball a little bit better. Definitely having B-Rob and Antonio Gibson helps a lot. I just don't think they're more physical than the teams they're going to be going up against. The only team I see that they may be able to outmuscle is the Browns, and that's just giving them a little bit more respect. But I don't see them stopping Nick Chubb and that offensive attack. So I think that'll be a lot of back and forth. And we all know Deshaun Watson will be back for that game. So it's not going to be the same Cleveland Browns that we've seen for the last 2 years as well. I think they're a good football team. I think Ron Rivera does just enough to keep his job every year. He's just finding ways to go hover around 500. And this is what this team has been for the last, 3 or 4 years. They've been pretty average to slightly above average team. So I think this is right along the lines of what Ron Rivera's team have always done. If you look at his last few years with the Panthers, it's kind of the same ilk. So I think they're a solid football team that won't be able to get it done when it matters most, but they're good enough to keep it competitive.
Well, they play in a good division, and there's no doubt about that. But I just got to point out, man, that defense is rounding into shape as Kendall Fuller's playing a bit better. He had his pick 6 yesterday to start the game, obviously. St. Just had a beautiful pass breakup that resulted in an interception, and he's playing a little bit better. And that defensive line, man, 2 sacks. I mean, look, I know it's the Houston Texans, but at least this weekend, 2 sacks for Jonathan Allen, 2 sacks for Montez Sweat, 1 for Daron Payne. I mean, these are really good players, especially this year. Some of these guys have taken a step forward. If you get really much of anything out of Chase Young when he gets back, that's just a very good first line front 4. And I think that they can make something happen out of that. And, they split the ball up a little bit more yesterday than they had in weeks past. It had been very Terry McLaurin heavy. Logan Thomas got in on the action in this game yesterday. Antonio Gibson had a few catches and made some noise. And, not a tremendous day rushing the ball, but Brian Robinson had some really hard-fought carries that resulted in first downs. So I don't know. I'm a little bit higher on them, I think, than you are. I get what you're saying about the way that they're winning, but McLaurin had almost 130 yards receiving, against the Eagles. So I think they can do it different ways. Will it ultimately come down to Taylor Heineke? Yeah, it will. But I'm not saying that they're going to make the playoffs, but I will say if the 49ers drop one against the Cardinals tonight, they are in a playoff spot. Right. They control their destiny for a playoff spot. And yes, they have to, I believe, face the Eagles at least one more time. I haven't looked exactly at their schedule, but Eagles one more time, probably have to face everyone in their division at least one more time since we're about halfway through the year. But I don't think it's that unrealistic. I think depending how impactful Chase Young can be is going to tell us a lot. And I know that he was supposed to be back by now, obviously, but hasn't happened. We'll see. So I will say that there is, I think that 51% chance, I don't know how they come up with it, but it sounds reasonable to me. I think they have about a coin flip chance of making the playoffs this year, which is, not what a lot of people expected at the beginning of the season. Certainly not what a lot of people expected as we got about a quarter of the way through. But I wouldn't be surprised if that comes to fruition. All right, let's move along. We've got to talk about the elephant in the room, the elephant in the very windy stadium. Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson had a rough outing. I want to preface this because this game looks worse on paper than it did in reality. Now, that's not to say that it looked good in reality. This was a poor performance, but their offensive line could not get anything going in the run game. Let me pull up their running stats real quick, but they were absolutely abysmal.
Yeah, I have it right here. They had 23 rushing attempts and only 2.6 yards per carry. So 23 rushing attempts, 59 yards for the entire game. So it wasn't a very good day running the football at all.
And that's on scrambles from Zach Wilson. That includes 3 carries for 26 from Wilson alone. So literally 20 some yards for the entire designed rushing attack.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. Nate Herbig was out for this game. So he was their backup guard who's been playing very well once they moved AVT out to tackle. He was out. So they had Dan Feeney in. Dan Feeney couldn't get it done. Cedric Abwehi, he couldn't get it done in this game. The Patriots defense was too good. And he didn't turn the ball over. There was one play where it probably should have been picked. I mean, it should have been picked. It hit McCourty right in the chest. But aside from that, he wasn't just throwing the ball all over the place. And the wind really, really impacted this game. This is exactly the kind of game where when you go up against Bill Belichick, he's just going to own you because he uses every facet to his advantage. He had the Patriots with the ball, with the wind at their back in the fourth quarter. He elected to have that direction, and I think that really, really helped them to close out the second quarter and the fourth quarter. So I don't know how much you watched of this game, but give me your thoughts real quick because I do believe that this was bad, but I do believe it's being overblown because this was a really, really, really difficult situation.
So I'm kind of conflicted on it because I think people are going overboard, but I think that the writing has been on the wall for a very long time as well. Like nothing about yesterday was necessarily surprising to me, and I did watch the entire game. So when I'm watching games on Sunday, I have the Fox game, the CBS game, and then a 4-screen with Red Zone pulled up, so I would be able to watch in on the other games. So normally I'll pick 2 games that I really want to key in on, and then just watch the other games sparingly and get to see all the major highlight plays from those. So, but I really wanted to watch this game because I thought it would be a great defensive matchup, and it was. However, if Matt Patricia wasn't absolutely inept, on the plus side of the field, this game could have been a 3-score game easily. They outgained the Jets by almost 200 yards. Before that last drive that the Jets had, it was literally 297 or 298 to 70 something yards. It was a pretty huge discrepancy all day. The only thing that I could take away from that game from the Jets was they found ways to get pressure on third downs and get pressure on the play action, which in early downs when they decided to do it, which is why I would say Matt Patricia, what are you doing? You average, they average 3.8 yards per carry, but a lot of those are taken away because of the sacks. I mean, how many times I don't have it right up on me, but Mac Jones was sacked so many times. Was it 7 times he was sacked yesterday? I believe.
This game, it was. I think it was
6
5,
times.
but 6.
So 6 times. He was
in this game. 3.8 yards a carry was successful.
Very
offense.
good.
That's all you could get.
Very, very, very successful. I mean, Damian Harris had 8 carries for 65 yards. Ramondre Stevenson, even though it wasn't his best game, he had 15 carries for 26 yards, but a lot of tough yards on early downs, and he was very effective in the receiving game as well. He had 6 catches for 56 yards. Short intermediate throws, quick stuff, and run game was very efficient. And Matt Patricia, that's a whole nother topic. We don't have to really get into that. But that was my biggest takeaway from the game was that the box score didn't reflect how big of a discrepancy it was in play, in my opinion. Even if you just manage the game better as far as running on early down, short passing game, at least get the field goal attempts. They were in field goal range at least 6-7 times. They were on the plus side of the field most of the game. Like I said, you outgained them by almost 200 yards, and then you only win the game because of a punt return at the end of it. That's just bad coaching on the offensive staff for the Patriots. So, and everybody talks about how much it affected Zach Wilson, but Mac Jones went 23 of 27 for 246 yards, and he wasn't just throwing the ball short. He wasn't just dinking and dunking. Ramondre Stevenson's longest catch was 18 yards. Jacoby Myers, 20 yards. Jonnu Smith, 26 yards. Damian Harris, 15. Hunter Henry, 20. Devontae Parker, 10. Nelson Aguilar, 11. He's throwing the ball in not just a lot of deep throws, but intermediate windows where he's having to deal with those same effects in the wind as anybody else is. So I don't like that excuse for Zach Wilson. I just don't think Zach Wilson played that well. The offensive line didn't help him out a lot. The run game wasn't effective at all. But that's what I kept saying earlier in the year when they were finding ways to kind of win, not in spite of him, a couple games in spite of him, but they were winning and he was just there. He was just doing enough to not crap the bed. But I kept saying, like, at some point, you're going to have to win the games because of him. You're going to have to win the games because of your quarterback play. And this is one of those games where if he was on his game, they're posting all the cut-ups now. Everybody has the all 22. Everybody can go. But they're posting cut-ups where there's like 7 to 8 throws. And he only threw the ball 22 times. But there's 7 to 8 throws where he just flat out misses it or hits the defender in the body and they drop an interception.
You're talking about yesterday?
Yes, yesterday. So there's cut-ups that are floating around right now. They're going crazy because it's the hot topic. But I do agree with you that people are going a little bit overboard. In my opinion, this is what he always was. This is what he's always been. And he's had times where he flashed and he looks pretty decent, but he's never had a game where you look at this guy and you're like, oh my God, he's the franchise of the team. I've never, and you probably watched more games than I have of this guy, but I've never watched this kid play and be like, wow, this guy's the franchise. We have to do everything we can to build around him. We have to do everything to push this kid into the right direction. He has a pretty solid cast. Offensive line has had some rotation, but I just think at this point you can call him what he is. He's a very talented kid with a lot of tools, but hasn't been able to put it together. And you don't have the time to sit there and wait on him to put it together with this core nucleus because it's too good, it's too young, there's too much upside to sit there and wait on this guy to figure it out. I'm not saying you just move on from him immediately, but after this season, you got to really look at your options. And that's not to say the kid's finished or anything. He could go somewhere and flourish. He could end up working it out here. I'm never going to just bury the guy. But I see too many people, and they're like big pundits. Like Chris Sims is one of the guys. Still giving him way too much of a pass. I think it's okay to call people what they are in this moment and still hold out hope for the future. And that's kind of my take on it. I do think people are going way overboard, trying to just bury the kid, but you have to be honest about it.
Well, I want to say this. Watching that game and really focusing on it, I need to go back and do a quick study on it because what I want to know is how many throws for Mac Jones were into the wind versus how many Zach Wilson throws were into the wind. Because what I would wager based on watching it one time through is that with the greater success of the Patriots run game, they ran the ball more on plays where they were running into the wind and threw the ball more on plays where they had the wind at their back. And a lot of those wild throws were in the second and fourth quarter. And those were the games where the gusting wind was opposing the Jets. So I need to go back and look at what throws he attempted in the first and third quarter because they should be more effective in terms of accuracy. Because to some degree, I will give a pass on third and in the third and fourth quarter because the whole reason the Jets lost that game in the way that they did is because they were punting into the wind in the fourth quarter, and the punter tried to account for the wind blowing, and for whatever reason, he either misjudged it or the wind just went still for a hot second there, and he outkicked his coverage, which is exactly how they ended up losing on that punt return with seconds left to go. So it was a major factor that people are not giving enough credence to, and I can't state specifically that's the reason for the inaccuracy until I go back and check exactly which throws were in which quarter, because Belichick intentionally chose to have the ball at the time that he did, going in the specific direction that he did. So that's the last thing that I will say about that game. And yes, I agree with you that they're winning in spite of him right now, and there's possibility for the future. This was not a good performance, but the fact you've got to be able to do something in the run game. You cannot. average under 3 yards per carry in a game where you have inclement weather and expect to win. Honestly, it is what it is. Okay, so last thing we're going to talk about before we talk a little Monday Night Football or Sunday Night
Hold on.
Football.
I had one more thing. I forgot to pull this stat up. This and then we'll move on quick. But Joe Flacco has played 3 games, right? He has 5 touchdown passes. He still leads the Jets in touchdown passes in those 3 games. Zach Wilson only has 4 through 7 games. So I think that's a huge discrepancy. And it's like Joe Flacco, we know what Joe Flacco is at this point in his career. He's a solid quarterback. He can come in as a backup and get it done. He could be solid. But I remember he was like 3rd or 4th in passing yards when he went out. But that's still too big of a discrepancy. 7 games and you only have 4 touchdowns to show for it. You can't win sustainably like that. And even, despite the game yesterday, I think the track record and the history of what he actually is pretty clear right now. And I think the Jets, I just couldn't imagine being a player on the Jets defense right now and having to deal with that. But like I said, we can move on. Still a very good team, very solid core. They'll be all right.
The defense is amazing. They did put on a show, but that's not really what we're talking about here today. And I will just say this. To be fair, Joe Flacco threw 4 touchdowns in 1 game. So that was the game against the Browns where they came back at the end. So, I mean, it's kind of an outlier, and they've been intentionally putting the ball in the hands of the running backs. But yeah, just didn't work. Just didn't work this week, and it's very, very disappointing for the Jets because this needed to be a statement game to close the rest of the season, and it could throw things off the rails a little bit. All right. So we want to talk briefly about the Dallas Cowboys and their balanced attack now that we're going to run short on time here, and I knew this was going to happen. Cowboys have a balanced attack with Zeke back. They're able to run the ball with different styles of running backs and then throw the ball to different styles of receivers. When healthy, they do have a group of guys that lends itself to being very balanced. So I like what they were able to do against the Vikings. Obviously, the defense made a major impact. Mike Parsons rushed the passer more often and made his presence known. DeMarcus Lawrence had a good game. Trevon Diggs had a good game. And it kind of felt like everybody else fed off that. Dante Fowler had a good game. Leighton Vander Esch was playing better. It just kind of felt like everybody was vibing after a pretty poor performance the week before.
Yeah, I mean, it was a solid performance. And I think this has always been the recipe for success for this team. I said yesterday on the pre-show, keep Dak around 30 passing attempts, and you'll be fine. And he only threw the ball 25 times, 22 of 25, 276 yards, 2 touchdowns. And it's just much more balanced. Like you saw Tony Pollard, his carries compared to Zeke's carries, they just complement each other so well. I mean, Tony Pollard had 15 for 80, a long run of 20, no touchdowns, but because Zeke finished off the runs in the red zone. But Zeke had 15 for 42, the tough, hard record yards. The first down carries that get you in second and medium and short, the 3rd and 4th down plays. I mean, he scored 2 touchdowns on 3rd and goal in short yardage situation. He kept 3 drives alive with 3rd down conversions. Just the tough, gritty, hard-nosed yards that you need. And they just complement each other perfectly. And same thing for the defense. That pass rush complements the back end so well. I think everybody is talking about the Cowboys' pass rush, which it does help when you lead the NFL in sacks, right? Let's not act like it doesn't. However, the back end is playing so well and so free that you can trust those guys. You can send 7, 8 guys in pressure. You can send 7 guys and do inside stunts and play Michael Parsons and drop coverage sometimes and trust the other guys to get home. When the DBs are playing as well as they are and when the front is rushing as well as they have the most complimentary football team in football when they're playing well and when they're healthy and whole. DeMarcus Lawrence missed some time. He's back. Micah's even been banged up, and allegedly that's why they haven't been rushing the passer as much with him because he's been banged up, and they just wanted to kind of take some of the impact off of him, is what I was told. But he rushed the passer a lot yesterday. But like I said, we don't need to harp too much on it. 40-3, big blowout, very, very, very balanced performance, and that was them at their best.
I think so. And look, yes, Tony Pollard is going to steal the headlines because he had almost 190 total yards. And is he more explosive than Zeke? 100%. But it makes a huge difference when you have a guy who can effectively move the chains in short yardage situations or score in short yardage situations. And that's exactly what we saw from him. That allows you to go, I mean, yeah, you have to play well too, but that allows you to go 22 of 25. That is a big reason that you have those attempts. That I agree with you. I think Did I disagree that Zeke was getting more carries than Pollard early in the year? Yeah, I thought that was a mistake. But I do feel like it should be roughly even, and Zeke is a important part of what they have there. Is he overpaid for what he brings to the table? Probably yes, but let's not act like he isn't a key part of what they do offensively, and we can see a correlation with when he's present and when he's not. All right. Sunday Night Football, we have two takes on this one. The first one are the Kansas City Chiefs and their supporting cast and what they have done to help Patrick Mahomes be the best that he can be. Do they have Tyreek Hill anymore? No, but they've got Sky Moore, they've got Jody Fortson, they've got Gray, they've got all these tight ends who are these are the guys who have kind of stepped up and been players in his absence. Obviously, Travis Kelce will always be an absolute monster. He took over the game. Juju Smith-Schuster wasn't available, but he's been impactful as well. Nicole Hardman doing his thing. Again, not there this week.
Mm-hmm.
But they have so many guys who can do what they need to do, and they are led by Travis Kelce as the game breaker. I love that you wanted to talk about this because I think it's a really, really nice supporting cast, and that doesn't even comment on the offensive line at all, which,
Right,
course,
and that's a
we know has been
huge
good.
part of it. And the running game. We'll talk about the skill guys first. So highlighting what you just said, Mecole Hardman and Juju Smith-Schuster are out. Those are both. Mecole Hardman is a Pro Bowl returner, All-Pro returner, who's an explosive guy in the short yardage situations in the open field and in the red zone. Juju Smith-Schuster is a Pro Bowl wide receiver. He's been a Pro Bowler for 2 years, I believe, had some of the best years in recent memory as a wide receiver. When you have two of those guys out of that caliber, and you still are able to put up the offense you are, it's still a huge attribution to the quarterback. You have to give him his proper love and his proper respect. However, Travis Kelce is still arguably one of the 2 or 3 best tight ends ever. I know that's been a wide discussion, but you still have Kadarius Toney. You went out and go get a guy like that. You went out and still have MVS from the Packers. You got Fortson and Moore. Moore is a second-round draft pick. That is a high investment draft pick that you're counting on to be a very productive player, and he's starting to come into that role. The tight ends that they're using, Noah Gray, Fortson, like they're just finding ways to get guys involved, and that goes to the coaching and that goes to the offensive line. Those are all supporting cast members to Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes played very well last night. He was 20 of 34 for 329 yards and 3 touchdowns. But let's just look at the receiving yards, like the long reception for Travis Kelce, 34 yards. Long reception for Watson, 29 yards. Sky Moore, 18. Fortson, 40. MVS, 18. Noah Gray, 12. That's not on quarterback play specifically. That is on, for one, your offensive coordinators and your play callers, Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, dialing it up. You don't get those explosive plays with that many people because a guy can throw it hard and far and he's accurate. That is a product of coaching, 100%. That is a product of having a generational piece like Travis Kelce that requires and demands so much attention that you're able to work and do other things with other people. Pacheco, the rookie, he rushed the ball 15 times for 107 yards. Like, imagine being able to do that when 2 of your best players are out. Just saying, hey, I'm going to hand the ball off and we're going to run for 100 yards today because I have one of the 3 to 5 best offensive lines of football to go on top of that. It's just such a thing where you have to be like, yes, this guy, Patrick Mahomes, is arguably the first or second best quarterback, depending on who you talk to, depending on your preference or whatever. But you can give him his proper respect and shine a light on exactly how good the supporting cast has been for the Chiefs and how good they've been for the last 4 to 5 years. I don't think it's disrespect to Patrick Mahomes to give the supporting cast their proper credit. He's arguably coming to the best situation in football history. When you look at the teams that they came into, they were already playoff teams. They're already second-round playoff teams. Then you get the emergence of Tyreek Hill early in his career. Like, it's okay to say things how they are. Tom Brady played with like 10 Hall of Famers when he was in New England on offense and defense. If you count both sides of the ball, that doesn't mean Tom Brady's any less great than he was. I just wish that we would give the rest of those guys and that coaching staff their proper respect, and you can still respect Patrick Mahomes for how great he is as well.
Yeah, no, he's an incredible player, and I talked to Charles Goldman yesterday when we previewed this game about the difference between what the Chiefs have done and what other teams have done when they shipped away a big-time player like a Tyreek Hill or like a Devontae Adams or even like an AJ Brown, even though they're not talked about in the same way, at least those trades aren't talked about in the same way, is that they made a concerted effort to build the supporting cast full of guys who could do certain things very, very well and were reliable and consistent at doing them. They didn't try and just give them a bunch of rookies who have to adjust to the NFL, who have to adjust to Mahomes' playing style. And they kept his number one receiver in the fold and gave him a quality offensive line. I think the Packers thought they were giving him a quality offensive line up there. That didn't necessarily work out just from injuries, but it's a different offense than we've been seeing, but it is still loaded with talent and very, very effective players. And then the last thing, we might have to circle back to this just because I want to get Max here on the show, but we will talk about the Chargers coaching decisions here at some point, because that has been something you've been on a soapbox about all season. And I know that you want to get in one more jab at the Chargers. All right, let's bring in Max. Let's bring in Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus for our college football update to Week 12. Max, thanks for joining, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing, guys. It was an awesome weekend of college football. I'm rocking the red, white, and blue that I had in my closet today. Huge Team USA game today in a couple hours in the World Cup, too. So it's going to be a pretty amazing day here at the PFF offices.
No doubt, man. No doubt. So things are rounding into form. We only have basically 1 week of traditional, regular season college football left. So as we get there, I've got our ticker at the bottom, kind of looking at all the teams and their ranking at the moment. I just want to throw it to you, man. What was your biggest takeaway? What is it that jumped off the screen for you in Week 12?
It's tough. There was a lot. It really looked like it was going to be an all-time insane day of college football. I always say, whenever you look at a slate of college football and you're like, oh, there's not really that many great games on this week, that's always the week where, everything turns to chaos. And TCU barely won a nail-biter. Ohio State battled Maryland in that game. A 13-point deficit was not nearly indicative of how that game went. It was a lot closer than that. Michigan pulled out a nail-biter, too. In that game against Illinois as well. The one team, though, that really had a shot at the playoff that no longer does is Tennessee, and they got boat raced by South Carolina in that game, 63-38. Spencer Rattler looked like his Oklahoma self from a few years ago when everyone was saying he's the next Heisman Trophy winner, he's the next number one overall pick. Well, he kind of fell off a lot in his last year at Oklahoma, and especially a lot this year too. But he was fantastic against Tennessee, who had the highest passing grade for the week, 5 big-time throws, no turnover-worthy plays. I mean, Tennessee could not stop Spencer Rattler in that game. And now, unfortunately, Hendon Hooker goes out with the torn ACL. It's going to affect his draft stock a lot as well, unfortunately. He's an amazing, amazing kid, and I hope he does better. But now Tennessee, you got 2 losses now. They're not playing in the SEC championship game. They have no chance at making the college football playoff after what's been an amazing year for that program. But it ends in heartbreak in South Carolina.
Yeah, man. That's a tough out for them. It definitely takes them out of the race. Just to jump into one other SEC team that also has a couple of losses, the Bama Crimson Tide, they get a win over Ole Miss. So they're still right there. And I know, Kyron, you've talked about the potential for them to sneak in even with 2 losses. Is that even remotely a possibility? Or does TCU's, escaping win over Baylor, does that pretty much lock them out?
There's still a possibility. It's just the actual probability of that possibility happening is so low. They'll have to get North Carolina has to beat Clemson in the ACC championship and take them out. USC has to lose to Notre Dame or to Oregon, and then you would have to get TCU to lose to Baylor in the Big 12 championship, or whoever they play in the Big 12 championship game. There's still a very clear path for Alabama to get in, and then they will also need Georgia to beat LSU. They're sitting at number 8 right now, so if those 4 teams in front of them lose, and then you got to factor into account that the Big Ten championship, not the Big Ten championship, we can call it the Big Ten championship game this week with Ohio State and Michigan. When they play, somebody has to lose there as well. So depending on how bad, if that's a blowout game or if that's a game that's not very close, there's still a very realistic possibility for them to get there. Just all that has to happen. And had Baylor finished the job this week, had Illinois finished the job this week, Alabama would be very clearly sitting there at number 6 or number 5 with a very realistic chance to get back in. So I think there's still a chance for them, but I don't think that it'll happen. And I don't necessarily think they deserve it this year. I think they're still one of the 4 best teams in college football. I don't even think there's much to debate about it. I think on their worst day, we've seen them play 2 bad football games against 2 top 10 teams in the country, and they've lost by a combined total of 4 points. And their offense has played pretty damn well in all of those games. And I think this is a whole other conversation. But what's TCU's best win on the year? Why do we respect them as a top 4 program?
I was trying to lead you to this.
Their best win is against Kansas State, who's sitting at 8-3. But look at Kansas State's losses. They've lost to 5 lost teams in the Big 12. Every other quality win. I had a conversation with a guy that works for the Pac-12 Network yesterday. He was saying that everybody else in the SEC besides Georgia doesn't have a quality win on their record. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean by that? So do SEC teams not count as quality wins anymore? Does Tennessee not still have 2 quality wins with 2 top 10 victories over Alabama and LSU? I countered him with this. I said, if Texas is a quality win for TCU, why is it not a quality win for Alabama? They went to Texas week 2 and found a way to win against a tough team that's nationally ranked now, sitting at 24, when they had 17 penalties and 3 turnovers and still found a way to win. So on their worst day, they found ways to beat teams or be so close that it's a 2 or 3 point loss to a top 10 ranked team. If Colorado, Cal, and Arizona are quality wins for USC, then why is it going on the road to Ole Miss, to Arkansas, quality wins for a team like Alabama, and vice versa for Tennessee as well? You can't have it both ways. The ACC has proven. I mean, Georgia Tech beats North Carolina and Drake May and those guys, and I thought Drake May had the perfect opportunity this week to kind of cement his Heisman status as the number 1 guy and go above and beyond. And I won't say didn't get it done because Josh Downs uncharacteristically dropped the touchdown that would have ended the game. The rest would have been history. But when you look at the landscape of college football, you can't discredit one conference or you can't try to discredit one conference by saying their conference wins mean more than one, especially when that conference has 13 of the last 18 national champions and then 17 of the last 18 national championship appearances and have the best bowl record and non-conference schedule record in those 18 seasons. It's like, you have to be honest about things and where they are. And this kind of brings us to the bigger conversation if you're a fan or not a fan of the 12-team playoff, because it pretty much eliminates all of this conversation.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think TCU, look, if they win the next 2 games, they have to get in. 13-0, and I think they deserve to get in at 13-0. But I agree with you, Kyron. If they drop one of these next 2 games against either Iowa State or Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game, they're not going to get into the playoff probably. And then that opens the door for, a loser of Ohio State and Michigan to get in. Another team like, USC, to get in as well, who I think if they win out, I think they have to get in the playoff as well because, going up against Notre Dame and then Oregon and after beating UCLA, that's a tough 3-game stretch that they get through. So, yeah, I mean, TCU really is on their last life, and they've been on their last life the entire season because of how beat up this Big 12 is. And it's yes, a Power 5 champion at 13-0, 1,000% deserves to be in the college football playoff. But once they go 12-1, that whole conversation shifts, and TCU all of a sudden goes from being in the playoff to I don't really think they have much of a shot if they lose one game, unless craziness happens. But again, I don't know if you put a 1-loss TCU and over a 2-loss Alabama, just seeing how good that Alabama has been this season, and their losses came on last-second miracle type plays. So, yeah, it's tough. TCU, again, if they win out, 1,000% put them in the playoff. But they mess up once in these next 2 games, they're done.
Question for you, Max. How much better is the Big 12 than the AAC this year?
Probably not much. Probably not by much. AAC is legit this year, yeah.
I mean, we literally saw Kansas State lose to Tulane this year. I mean, if Baylor and UCF, I know UCF dropped a tough one this week, but if Baylor and UCF played on a neutral field today, who do you favor to win in that game?
Probably UCF.
I mean, and I'm not saying that to kind of crap on the Big 12. I'm just saying that we have to put into proper context these conversations. I saw that, Joel Klatt, famous SEC hater, right? He's on the broadcast for the USC UCLA game, and he's saying, oh my God, how awesome would it be to play UAB and Austin Peay late in the season? if you're one of these SEC teams, kind of like crapping on them, right?
Yeah.
But why didn't anybody talk about USC playing Arizona, Cal, and Colorado in succession in November before this game? Like, is that a respectable stretch of football?
No.
I mean, the only difference is the brand behind it. So everybody's touting those as quality wins, or saying that, they're just beating their conference. They can't control their conference. That's absolutely correct. You can't control your conference, but you can control the narrative around it. We can be honest about how bad those football teams are. USC's best win so far is against a now 3-loss UCLA team.
Yep.
That's like saying that Georgia's best win would be against Kentucky or somebody. Like, you can't have it both ways, in my opinion. And I just hate the way the conversation is framed.
Yeah.
Because history, and you know what? Football games aren't played off the past. But if history tells us anything, is that TCU squeaks by 13-0, gets to the playoff, and then they get beat by 60 by Georgia. Like, that's just what history tells us will happen. And is that actually like good for college football?
No, that's an interesting question. I think no one will. I'm not going to sit here and say I think TCU is one of the top 4 teams in college football, because I don't think they are. They've had way too many close calls already with a lot of other teams so far this season. But like, again, it's just like, it's a resume thing. It's like, yeah, you cannot keep them out. But again, like saying that, hey, Georgia is going to be, or Georgia or Ohio State or Michigan, whoever plays them in the playoff, they're probably going to be favored by like double digits in that game. It's like, that's completely correct. And again, it's like, yes, they have to get into the college football playoff as an undefeated Power 5 champ, but it's not out of the question. No, they're not a top 4 team in college football, because I don't know if they are right now. I don't think they are.
Right. I had a shout out to my guy Gabe Kuhn. He played football at the University of Memphis. He works in Memphis ESPN radio, and we had a conversation about this the other day. And his point was that we give TCU a chance when everybody else is going to get blown out as well. He was like, you saw what happened when Oregon went and played them, and they lost 49-0. And I think Oregon's a different team now than they were then, obviously. Yeah. But he was like, everybody else, when Notre Dame gets in, they get blown out. When Washington got in the other year, they got blown out. He's like, the smaller schools deserve a chance to get blown out like the rest of the schools. And I was like, you know what? I said, that's not a terrible point. I was just saying the probability and the likelihood of it being a competitive game and actually a good game is more likely when you put better teams that have played tougher competition over the course of the season. And that was my only point. Yeah. Like, say, for instance, I think, and this is my thing, I don't think that Alabama deserves the game, but I think Alabama is by far the worst matchup for Georgia. Because
yes, I agree with you. They put up more of a fight than TCU would against Georgia.
100%. Only because they have the quarterback that can make the throws.
Exactly.
Georgia's DBs aren't great. But the thing that they have is they have the front 7 and they have the guys they trust to get home. They don't do a lot of blitzing. They don't do a lot of pressure because they trust those guys to get home. And they're very static. They're going to have those 2 safeties back, and they're going to force you to make tough hole throws and then throws that you aren't accustomed to making because they're so difficult. Alabama has the guy that can do that. Maybe potentially USC has the guy to do that. I don't think they can block the guys up front. But you have to have a quarterback that can make those throws. When we go and do these polls and we do these committee rankings, I wonder if stuff like that ever comes into play, because when you're talking about playoff games, it's all about matchups. And I think you should look at the matchup and the history behind who's more battle tested than, say, Alabama or LSU.
I have a quick question. I just want to throw this out there. So this is not something I have off the top of my head, and I don't know if either of you do either. I didn't prep you for this, but how many times has a number 4 seed beaten a number 1 seed in the college football playoff?
Once. It was
I know Alabama won as a 4 seed.
Yeah, Alabama. Then they lose to Ohio State, and they were the 1 seed. Ohio State was the 4. I think it was the first year of the playoff, because I remember Zeke Elliott ran wild, and then they lost, or they beat Oregon in the championship game. I believe that's the only time that the 4 beat a 1, though. Everything else has been number 1 winning, I believe.
I can't remember. Was Clemson the year they beat the year Alabama beat them in the Sugar Bowl? The game?
Maybe.
Yeah. I'm not sure, but it's happened before. But I think the bigger conversation is only like 3 or 4 times has the number 1 seed actually been the national champion. A lot of times it's been the 3 or the 2 seed that comes through and wins, which is interesting.
Yeah. No, it's definitely going to be interesting. I mean, and people don't talk about it enough. Like, the college football playoff is like the last few years has just not been great. Like the playoff games have been terrible, honestly.
There's been a couple of good ones for sure, yes. But yeah.
Georgia, Oklahoma, Rose Bowl, I go back to all the time. That game was awesome, double overtime. But other than that, like, there have been a lot of blowouts in these college football playoffs. So it's like, when you're arguing, oh, well, this team get blown out by this team, it's like, just put the 4 most deserving teams in, let what happens. Because the college football playoff is 8-year run now. It's had a lot of stinkers in the semifinals, at least.
So let me ask you guys then, who, before we get to predictions and whatnot, as we kind of close out the segment, who would you want to see more than anything else in the college football playoff, and then seed them so we would know what the matchups would be? Kyron, go ahead.
Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, Alabama 4. I think those are the 4 best teams in college football. That's what I would want to see, because I think those would be the 4 best games that we would get. But I would actually switch. And you can't do that because of the record, but I'd rather have I'd rather have Georgia play Michigan, and then Alabama play Ohio State, and then those 2, or you can flip either one of those, however you want to do it. SEC team, Big Ten team, and then play it out from there. Like, those are by far the 2 best conferences, or at least the 2 conferences with the elite teams. I think the best teams in college football are those teams.
I think if it was those, I would want to see the conference games first, and then whoever won between those 2 close it out. Max, what about you?
I mean, if you really are saying the 4 best teams don't care about resume, don't care about record at all, I agree with Kyron. I think those are the 4 best teams in college football. Maybe you swap, so you don't have Ohio State, Michigan playing twice in 3 games, and Georgia and Alabama, who I actually haven't played yet this year. But I think that'd be that. If you ask me who are the 4 best teams, I don't care who won or lost. I don't care how many wins or losses. Those are probably the 4 teams that I would say for the college football playoff.
Yeah, and USC may deserve their respect at the end. Like you said, if they go in the stretch and they beat UCLA, Notre Dame, then to win the Pac-12 championship, that's respect worthy. But their defense is so bad.
It's atrocious.
It's not to be taken seriously. I don't care if you win all your games 48-45 or you score a lot of points. It's like they're just not meant to be taken seriously, because history tells us when you do play a good defense and your offense isn't going to give you those 40 points like they have in the past. We see it every year from the Pac-12. You get blown out. It's just what happens. And
we've seen it with Lincoln Riley too. Like, when he goes into the playoff, and it's like, you have Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, all these guys, and in that 1 year, they actually ended up going to double overtime with Georgia. But there's other times where, like, they play against Alabama in the college football playoff with Kyler Murray, who's like this world beater at quarterback,
right?
And it doesn't work. It's like when you go up against the big guys, it doesn't work. And when you don't have a defense that can even compete out there,
right,
you're going to get blown out. That's why I think if USC makes the playoff, it's like, they have an electric offense and a great offensive line, an amazing quarterback. But it's like their defense is absolutely atrocious right now. And no matter who they play, they're allowing like 30-plus points per game. So, like, you go up against a Georgia who's a well-rounded team, or Ohio State with the explosive offense and a really good defense, honestly, then it's like you're going to have to put up 50 points if you're USC, which is tough against those elite defenses.
I mean, even Michigan. I mean, if Corum's even semi-healthy, he runs for 250 yards against those guys.
Absolutely.
And that's not to say, he's been doing it against everybody. He had 100 yards in the first half before he got hurt against Illinois. But it's just, I can't take them seriously enough. Like, if you go and you go make the playoffs, and then you win in the playoffs, you earn a huge level of respect, and then you start to get talked about a little differently. But for now, it's like I can't take them seriously.
I don't even know if they're going to beat Notre Dame this weekend. That's why I'm hesitant. I'm hesitant when everyone's like, oh, USC, did they make the playoff? And I'm like, dude, they got to play Notre Dame and Oregon. I think Notre Dame is playing like a top 10 team in the country right now. I think Oregon is still a top 10 team, just taking out the resume. Like, I think USC, I mean, again, if they win out, 1,000% put them in, because I don't see this coming. But they have a brutal couple games now, and they struggle with UCLA, who I would say is a good bit behind both Notre Dame and Oregon right now.
Yep. And, we talked about this last week, but listen, if you get Marcus Freeman a quarterback, and you give him a couple skill guys. I mean, they're not terrible offensively, but if you get this guy just a legit quarterback, that should be their only focus this offseason. If you got to do it through the portal, word on the street is, I probably shouldn't be saying it, but Sam Hartman's up for grabs this offseason. If you could go get a Sam Hartman, if you can get one of these guys, and I heard some crazy stuff like Drake May and Alabama are talking, which would be
crazy.
Which is like, I almost wouldn't even respect.
He was committed there, wasn't he, when he was in high school?
I mean, even as an Alabama fan, I would absolutely love it, but it's like I almost wouldn't respect it. It's like, all right, come on, what are we doing here? Like, stick it out with the guys. But my point is, you go get Freeman a guy, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily a GOAT level quarterback. We see what Brian Kelly did with Jaden Daniels, a solid quarterback in the Pac-12, but you put him around those SEC athletes and that SEC offensive line, and you let them figure it out. look where they are. They're sitting here at 9-2, probably about to be 10-2, going into the SEC championship game. So I think it's of the same ilk. Get Freeman a quarterback, and that Notre Dame team could be a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, 1,000%. Again, if they didn't, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but if they didn't screw up against Marshall and Stanford, who are horrible teams, if they didn't screw up those two games, they have a close loss to Ohio State. Notre Dame is in the thick of this college football playoff. They're in the thick of this college football playoff, and all they need to do is beat USC, and they'd probably be in the playoffs. So, yeah, if they didn't screw up against Marshall and Stanford early on in the season, they definitely, I think, would be a college football playoff team if they beat USC.
You know, one last thing, and we'll move on. I'm not a Notre Dame fan by any means. Actually, historically hate them, but I respect them for scheduling tough non-conference games as an independent. They don't have to schedule the games that they have. I know they kind of have like the ACC is kind of like borderline type deal with ACC kind of, but for them to go out and schedule those tough, you don't have to play Ohio State if you're Notre Dame. The cachet, the brand, the Golden Domes, you can get in without playing Ohio State. To schedule in Ohio State, and they have to play the USC game every year to keep your Stanford game.
Yeah.
Right. You know, they didn't have to do this. So I really, really respect them for doing that. And they're number 3 in the recruiting rankings right now behind Alabama and Georgia. So a couple years, man, we might be talking about them a little differently.
Oh, 1,000%. I think they're a sleeping giant right now. And again, I think they're playing like a top 10 team in the country. They're not ranked like that because of their resume, but they're playing as well as a lot of teams, a lot of the top teams right now.
Are we about to get into picks, Max?
I think so.
All right, I got one more thing before that. Did you watch the Ole Miss Arkansas game?
I did. I kind of saw that coming. I think Arkansas is a really good football team, and I think a lot of people are sleeping on them.
Yeah, KJ Jefferson back helped a lot. But how do you lose when you have 703 yards of offense as Ole Miss? You ran for 463 yards. They ran for 463 yards and lost the game. Quinshon Judkins had 24 carries for 214 and a touchdown. Zach Evans had 17 carries for 207 yards and a touchdown. And Jackson Dart, the quarterback, ran for 44 yards on 11 carries. Absolutely insane if you lose when you put up 700 yards of offense.
I could not believe that either when I first saw it. I admittedly didn't watch much of that game with all the other craziness going on in college football. But, yeah, I was looking at the box score after that game. I was like, how the hell did Lane Kiffin lose that game? And, yeah, it could have been one of his last games as Ole Miss's head coach. We'll see what happens with the Auburn stuff coming up pretty soon. But, yeah, that was funny. It was wild.
It was funny. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, Lane Kiffin's not focused." I'm like, "Are y'all watching the game? They have 500 yards of offense in the third quarter.
Doing his job. He's doing his job."
But yeah, anyways, man, I just had to point that one out. That was hilarious to see.
Yeah, that was insane.
All right, so before we jump into official picks, I might just be getting Kyron wound up about TCU again. But just looking at the DraftKings odds for Heisman right now, we've talked about it a lot, and at this point, it seems like CJ Stroud's the guy almost no matter what happens. But Max Duggan is a guy. I have been doing this college football update except for the week I was sick, every single week since week 1. Mm-hmm. No one has ever even brought up Max Duggan once as a potential guy, and he is 4th in betting odds to get it. So tell me, is this 100% narrative? Did he do something insane this past week that put him in the race? How did this happen?
I would say it's narrative. I would say it's a narrative thing right now, but he's graded pretty well. What I will say, though, is that against Baylor, they lost their star receiver, Quentin Johnston, who might be the top receiver taken in the NFL draft. They lost a star running back in Kendra Miller, both to injuries. So he was by himself, and they were down by 8 with about 8 minutes to go in that game. And he led a furious comeback for TCU, which I think you got to give him a lot of credit for. He was beat up in that game, too. Like, his elbow was bleeding all over. So I think that was like give him some props. Considering him a Heisman candidate, though, I think
it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Throw it away. Throw it in the trash.
Yes, it's ridiculous. He's not a Heisman candidate. I do give him props for leading that comeback, but I don't think he's close to the top guys right now.
It's simply because the guys that actually deserve to be in the conversation for it mainly have 2 losses now. Yeah. I think Bo Nix should still be the favorite. I think Bryce Young is obviously the best player and has had the most moments. But, like you said, it is a narrative award. So the narrative isn't pretty anymore. So you got to throw the Cinderella story in there. It's simple as that.
Yeah.
So as of now, or at least according to these rankings, CJ Stroud -125, Caleb Williams +130, and Blake Corum +1,500. So at least those 3 guys we've talked about. I know that you've liked Blake Corum. Reagan Harris was kind of pounding the table for Blake Corum about halfway through the season. And the week that you were moving and he came on, he was like Blake Corum's my guy for Heisman. He's who I would want to win. I know there was a scary moment for him, I think, with injury this past week.
Yeah.
Did he bounce back from that? What's the word on Blake Corum going forward?
He's in a walking boot right now. So it is. I have a friend actually a coworker who is really close to the Michigan athletic department. They have no idea whether or not he'll be ready for Ohio State. It was a bad injury. It looked like he actually forced himself back into the game and got a carry, and then they took him out immediately. He's in a walking boot. He says his knee is okay. He says he'll be back soon. I don't know if he'll be back this week, and if he's not back this week with how beat up Michigan is, that could be a rout. Ohio State really could put the beat down on Michigan without Blake Corum, without a lot of their star players. So they desperately need him to be healthy this week, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to go on Saturday.
So if he doesn't play and Ohio State wins, and the outlook is that he won't play, does that singular player, because he's at the caliber that he is, does that knock him out? Or does that knock Michigan potentially out of the playoff completely?
I wouldn't say so. No, I think the idea would be, okay, he's out for this game, then he'll be back for, potentially a playoff. So I don't think that they would knock him. I think, a one-loss Michigan would then maybe need TCU or USC to lose to get in. I think they need one of those two to happen. So, yeah, they'd probably be rooting for TCU or USC to lose, but I don't think that they're going to knock him only because of Blake Corum, though. Like Tennessee would for Hendon Hooker, like Tennessee without Hendon Hooker, even if they beat South Carolina, they might get knocked for not having Hendon Hooker for the rest of the season and not be able to make the playoff because of that.
Okay. All right. Final picks. We're coming up on the end here of this segment. So I assume that neither of you are picking against CJ Stroud for not necessarily your choice, but as your prediction for Heisman.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. And then how about top 4 for college football playoff? I asked you who you wanted before, but your actual predictions now.
You want to start, Kyron?
Yeah, so Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, TCU 3rd, and I think that USC, if they win out, they'll go 4th, but I don't think they will. So I'm going to say Michigan slides in with the benefit of the doubt because Corum wasn't fully healthy, so they'll get that one up first, and then you'll get them against Georgia again, and then you get Ohio State versus TCU. That'll be my pick 4 now.
Yes, I would agree. Actually, completely agree with that because I don't think USC is going to survive both of these next 2 games, and I think they'll give the benefit of the doubt to Blake Corum, Michigan. I think Corum. If I had to give out the Heisman right now, I would give it to Blake Corum. So yeah, I actually completely agree with Kyron's top 4. That's what it's going to end up being.
All right, appreciate it, Max. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week when things are pretty much set in stone, man. Let everybody know where they can find your work and your social media, and we look forward to a big-time week of college football.
Yes, absolutely. You can find my work at pff.com, writing 5-6 articles a week. Find my social media at Chad_Maxwick on Twitter and TikTok. And yeah, it is a awesome slate of college football to close out the regular season. So I cannot wait to talk about it with you guys next week.
I feel like every single week we have you on, the number of articles you write per week increases. Like by the next season, we're gonna have you on for our week 1 preview, and you're gonna have 17 articles per week for Pro Football Focus.
I'm wearing out my editors right now. They either love me or hate me because I'm pumping out so much content, but I'm constantly sending them stuff. So yeah, this kind of a love-hate relationship we got right now.
Awesome, Max. Well, thanks again, and we will see you next week.
Yes, sir.
All right, we have George Bremer of the Herald Bulletin on to talk about the Indianapolis Colts and the state of the franchise. George, I have heard you on some other shows that you preview the Colts, for matchups for other teams. I think you do a great job, so I'm excited to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So Kyron here is a former D1 and pro offensive lineman. He was an all-AFL offensive lineman, so he has plenty of experience in the locker room. He's been around a ton of coaches, and we both have some opinions about the Jeff Saturday hire, which obviously is the key talking point that we're going to be kind of covering today. But to lead up to that, once Saturday was hired, they come off of a big win immediately. And then they lead most of the game against the Eagles this past week, only to give it up late. I'm not going to knock them too hard for that. The Eagles are a very good team. But obviously, the level of success overall has been better since he's been there. There's really no denying that. So before we give our opinions, I would just like you to give a little bit of insight into what you know about how the players there are actually feeling about it.
Yeah, I think it was a wake-up call in a lot of ways. I mean, they've gone through a 3-week stretch there that was just chaos, where first you had Matt Ryan benched, and then you had your offense coordinator fired. At the same time, they traded Nyheim Hines as one of the more popular guys in the locker room. And then the week after that, Frank Reich was fired, and I think that was sort of the crescendo here. I think the guys kind of rallied around each other at that point. That was the message. Matt Ryan talked to him that week, even before he gets the starting job back, and said, look, they can fire. Basically, he said, if they can fire the head coach, they can fire anybody in here. So, whatever you're going to get out of the rest of the season is on you. It's up to you guys to kind of carry whatever's going to happen from here on out. I think Jeff Saturday came in and reinforced that thinking. He wanted to empower the leaders in the locker room and telling them, look, whatever story is written about this season, it's going to be what you guys, cause it to be. So I think they just took some accountability, as a group. I think it was a big wake-up call. They came in here with extremely high expectations. They were under 500, and I think they understood at that point the owner's not playing around. This isn't going to be acceptable, and they needed to change what they were doing.
Yeah, so my thought – so here's the thing. We reacted to this live on air because we were doing our Monday recap when the firing actually went down. And then it was later in that same recap that we actually found out that Jeff Saturday was hired. And our split-second reactions were obviously a little bit of shock because it is kind of out of left field, obviously. But for me, my immediate thought was, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen by bringing him in for the team? And what is the best possible outcome for the way things were going as they were, whether you brought in some other interim coach or you kept Frank Reich? And when I asked that out loud, the consensus was kind of like, well, it's probably not that much of a difference. And it kind of looks like the ceiling has actually improved a little bit since he came in. So from that standpoint, I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. Now, the other narrative has been, why bring in this guy who has no collegiate or pro level coaching experience over guys on the roster who are on the coaching staff, or at least another coach externally that has a more elaborate resume. And then also the Fritz Pollard Alliance came out and they're investigating the hire as well. And so, Kyron, you had a tweet, and I'm curious to see if you still feel this way or if it was like a momentary thing. But you said, I'm not really against it because having a minority coach come in and take over a team that's not doing well just generally doesn't lend itself to a improved opportunity down the line, right? You're taking over a bad situation. You're kind of just being set up to take the fall a little bit. So for Jeff Saturday, he's already got a great job in the media. So even if this doesn't turn into a coaching experience, he can basically just take that media fallout and lashback from anybody and then just go back and do what he was doing before, more than likely. Whereas somebody else, it might hurt their long-term chances. I mean, we saw Rich Bisaccia, not a minority, but like even no matter how well he did, it didn't really matter for him. So what are your thoughts on that now, a couple weeks removed?
Oh, I still feel the same way about that. I mean, I can't remember the author, but she wrote a nice piece about historically minority coaches having to clean up messes for franchises and then not getting rewarded for it at the end of the day. So I still feel that way wholeheartedly about that. However, I can put that feeling aside and still give Jeff Saturday and the guys that are there now their proper respect and how well they've handled the situation. And I don't even think you need, quote unquote sources or insiders to look at the difference on that sideline during the weekend. When you see those guys out there, they're running out, they're pushing Jeff Saturday after they score touchdowns, after they get a stop, coaches are running up to their players and sleep. The atmosphere and the energy is so different than it was earlier in the year. I think playing Matt Ryan, he's not, the world beater that he may have once been, but he's keeping you in every football game. He's been very, very respectable. Deciding to go back to that guy and let's be serious about football again has taken them leaps and bounds. I mean, when they benched him, they were 3-2-1, leading the division. They were sitting there with the actual chance to win the AFC South. And I mean, I don't know if it's mathematically impossible. They still have a chance, I believe. You probably know more than I would, George, but they still are a very solid football team. I think you can unequivocally say they played their best football of the season the last 2 weeks. I mean, mistakes have been at a minimum. The energy on the sidelines different. They could have finished yesterday better. I think, especially offensively. As a defense, you can't expect to hold an offense like that down for 4 quarters. Especially they were moving the ball. They just had some turnovers, some inopportune fumbles. A.J. Brown had one of his worst games. When you have stuff like that, you got to capitalize on it more than they did offensively. But I think even saying that, I mean, they ran the ball pretty dang well yesterday. 26 rushes for 99 yards. JT is getting back to form. They're starting to get a little bit healthier. I just think there may be it's hard to say because they do have speed at receiver. You got Paris Campbell, you got Alec Pierce. Maybe just a more consistent guy with the hands. Paris Campbell had a couple crucial drops. Alec Pierce had a crucial drop. Just getting consistent. Those guys are young. So I think they played very well the last 2 weeks, and the future prospects are bright. Are they bright enough to bring Jeff Saturday back full time? That'll be the discussion over the next, month of the season. But proper respect to him because I think he's done a hell of a job so far.
Yeah, I think one of the questions is, does he even want to? Was the deal with this that it was always going to be just a part-time thing? Because when you do this, you're away from your family way more than in a media role. So, George, I want to ask you, partially as a reporter, but partially as just an opinionated sports follower, what is your take on just the energy and the difference in situation since Frank Reich is gone? Because Frank had a lot of respect around the NFL, among fans, and it kind of seemed like this season went off the rails a little bit. But aside from just the pure results, just the statistical results, what is your feeling about what that building's actually like now that the change is made?
Yeah, honestly, when you're in there, it's not a whole lot different. I mean, on game day, it is. And I think you see guys, like I said, I think you see guys taking a lot of accountability for their own roles. I think they understand, what the situation is this last month of the season and what they need to do to turn things around. Inside the building, they really haven't changed a lot. I think it's always been a really business-like approach with this team. And I think if anything, they just got tighter together. I think there was really that week in particular when Saturday took over, there was really a lot of noise from the outside. Obviously, it was a very shocking move. A lot of people attacking this franchise from a lot of different angles. And I think the players kind of took it upon themselves and said the one thing they can control is what happens on the field. I think that's been their salvation. Now you get out there, people can say what they want all week long. People can put whatever line score they want to put on the game. They can, think whatever they want to think. But when you get out there on the field on Sunday, you control what's happening. And I think they kind of took salvation in that. I think that's what you're seeing on the field right now is them saying, we own this. But at the same time, I think the frustrating thing about Sunday is a lot of the things that cropped up. It was a much better opponent. And you got to give Philadelphia all the props as, if not the best team in the NFL, one of the top, 2 or 3. I mean, they're right there. And then they had a lot to do with what was going on. But I think one of the frustrating things for the Colts is all year long, the same things keep popping up. Not getting a block when you need to in a key situation, having a penalty that puts you behind the sticks and kills a drive, missed field goal again on Sunday. I mean, just these little things that hold you back, consistency, drop passes. I think that's been the frustrating thing. Coaching change hasn't really changed that. There's more energy. I think Jeff Saturday's exceeded pretty much everyone's expectations except maybe his own. I think the rest of that coaching staff deserves a lot of credit too for rallying around him, getting these guys ready. The things that surprised me the most, you haven't seen like substitution issues. You haven't seen timeout issues. You haven't seen the game management problems that I expected for somebody coming in mid-season. And I think that's a real testament to Saturday's leadership and to what this coaching staff has done as a whole. As far as, how long-term it goes, I think that's a really good question. Reggie Wayne mentioned last week that Jeff Saturday, he knows, likes to be at home. He said maybe that's changed, maybe it hasn't, and maybe it will change over the last month and a half here. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this all ends up.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I just mean, coming out of nowhere, and he hadn't expressed a desire to be a coach before, and if you do, you generally don't go into the media first, right? Like you start accruing that resume, and I know he's been doing it for high school, but without knowing the guy too closely, I had more of the feeling that's just to stay around the game really than to, to further his career. he definitely made good money as a very long-term starter for the Colts, lots of Pro Bowls. And I think that the reality is that Jim Irsay is more blunt than a lot of other people in the NFL are. He's willing to say and do things that other people aren't willing to do. And you can give him some credit for that. Maybe you can knock him for that in certain situations. But if we're looking at a situation where he's basically guaranteeing that he's not going to rehire whatever interim coach there is, then maybe this was the best possible situation, because the tension, the need to win for your job, that disappears. You know what I mean? And that's a relief for everybody involved. Obviously, players are still playing for the jobs, but it's different with everybody else. It's different. If you kind of know what to expect, and then it's just on your resolve and, your fortitude, that's a different story. So I want to talk a little bit about the offensive line, because I did not watch this game as closely as I would have liked. Didn't get a chance to, but it does seem that overall the offensive line play was better this week and last week as well. Kyron, as our offensive line expert, what would you attribute that to? I mean, is it literally his influence? Is it just that the guys are taking more accountability? What do you think changed the way that they play?
For one, they're starting to get a little healthier as far as just the skill guys. I mean, when you get your guys back, JT's starting to get back. He's starting to get in his groove a lot more as well. That takes a lot of pressure off, because when you can run the ball, we can stay ahead of the chains. You're not in second and long, third and long as much, where people are pinning their ears back and you know what's coming. Just a little bit more balance offensively, and I think that's going to help out a lot. More importantly, they just got good offensive linemen that just haven't played well over the course of the season. Now
but why? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, it's just the NFL is hard, man. It's game-to-game basis. Like, now you're starting to see those guys play closer to what their level has been in the past, and I think a lot of that just has to do with like reps, bro. Like, it's hard, man. Like you saw yesterday, the Colts could have easily won that game, and like we said, the Eagles are arguably the best team in football. They have the best record in football. It's hard to win every week, so you got to take a little bit of that and give it to the individual players for just saying enough is enough. We're going to play better. You got to give a little bit to the balance that they have offensively now, and a quarterback that gets the ball out on time as well. Because it's hard playing with the guy that's still trying to learn and figure it out and holding the ball, and maybe not necessarily where he's supposed to be on time. And then you got to give a little bit to the coach staff as well. Let's give them a little bit of credit, because there has been a clear and distinct shift in the last couple of weeks. So I think you got to attribute a little bit to all of those guys. But I think mainly, if I had to give like 70% of the credit, you just got to be like, bro, I'm tired of this. We're going to get better, and we know how good we are. Let's go do it. And I think that's just what's happened over the last couple of weeks.
Well, my other thing was, when we first reacted to this live, I was like, well, my instinct is that with Jeff Saturday coming in, a veteran player who played with a veteran quarterback for a long time, Matt Ryan's probably getting in pretty quick. And that was the case. They rode with Ellinger for what was it, like a quarter or something, maybe not even, and he was right back in there. And so do you feel like the team responded to Matt Ryan coming back in as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, because it just takes it seriously. I mean, it shows you're serious about winning football games again. It's as simple as that. But go ahead, George. I didn't mean
No, 100%. I think they have a lot of belief in Matt Ryan, because you look at all four of their wins this year, he's led a game-winning drive in all four of them, and even the tie, it was a fourth quarter comeback. So you got a guy like that. I think you have, like you were talking about earlier, you've got that belief on the sideline of, okay, he's going to do what he needs to do. If we do our job, it's going to be taken care of, and I think that was probably one of the more disappointing things about last night. They had the ball at the end of the game, and they had a chance to maybe get 3 points and, walk away with that win still. And it was one of the first times this year that they've had the ball in the fourth quarter and not been able to move it. And again, I think a lot of that goes to this Philadelphia defense. One thing Bernard Raymond said, from an offensive line standpoint, he's the rookie left tackle, and he's obviously learning on the job, and there's going to be rough spots. But he said Philadelphia is so tough because they come at you with so many different guys. You're not trying to learn one guy for the entire game and maybe his 2 or 3 moves. You're learning like 8 guys. They're going to come at you over the course of that game. And I think in the fourth quarter that caught up to them, and they weren't able to get that last drive together. But I think if you went in that locker room right now and you were able to pull all 53 guys or 70 basically with the practice squad, they're going to tell you that they believe Matt Ryan will come through, if it happens again Monday night against Pittsburgh. That's the belief in him, I think, is a big part of this turnaround as well.
Yeah, I had the feeling. And for me, the eye test didn't tell the same story as the stats for Matt Ryan this season. I mean, even in that horrible Thursday night game against the Broncos, to me, Matt Ryan looked like the better quarterback. His guys weren't making plays. And more importantly, the offensive line could not block anything in that game. It was one of the worst offensive line performances I've seen all year. And there have been a few worse. Yeah. But still, for a primetime game for an offensive line that we had higher expectations for, I couldn't believe how bad that was. And they were shuffling guys around, trying to get things fixed. And it was just to no avail. And they did end up, coming out in the end. But I thought Matt Ryan was playing on time more accurately. I mean, he was making throws on the move that I haven't seen Matt Ryan make in a minute. So, he was trying. And so I don't know about the future for him necessarily, but for the rest of the season, I definitely felt like he was the guy they should go with. And I have no doubt that they will as long as he's healthy. But for the future of some of these other guys here, whether Jeff Saturday stays, whether Matt Ryan stays, I have a tendency not to think so. What about Chris Ballard? What is the feeling about Chris Ballard kind of, in that beat? Like, what do guys think about his chances of sticking around past this season? I mean, I understand not firing a GM in the middle of the season because there's only so much instability that you want to create. But what about going into next year?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. It's hard for us to have a lot of predictions right now after the way things have gone this year. I don't think any of us saw Jeff Saturday coming in and really any of those moves that happened in that 2 or 3 week span. I think all of them were kind of things that caught us all off guard on the beat. So we're not really trying to be too definitive about what we think will happen when this season ends, most likely in January. But I do know Jim Irsay has a great deal of respect for Chris Ballard. He gave him sort of the dreaded vote of confidence during that introductory press conference with Jeff Saturday. But when he talks about, in his mind, Ballard was the top GM available when they got him back in 2017 and how many other options Chris Ballard had. That's something Irsay has been saying really for 5 years. I think he really has a strong belief that this is a guy that he wants to lead this franchise. Now, has that changed over the last, 11 games and will it continue to change over the last 6 or 7? That's kind of the question because, in April, he was calling Matt Ryan a Navy SEAL and an astronaut and one of the most unique people on earth. And he was very instrumental in Sam Ehlinger coming in and being the starter. He likes to downplay that now, but every bit of information we have is that he was driving that boat. So that's what makes it hard. I know that he has a great deal of respect and he has a great deal of he's been really impressed with what Chris Ballard's done for the most part with this on this job, but I just don't know, if they suffer a lot. I think depends on how they finish this season. He's really reacted to some tough losses this year, very emotionally, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this year plays out.
He's a very heartfelt guy, which you definitely know if you followed him at all. So I've loved to follow the team building process, and Chris Ballard's been a guy that's been very intriguing because I think he's done a pretty good job of evaluating talent. I think he's made a lot of nice moves. I think there were some clear miscalculations. I think he will always and forever be somewhat hamstrung by the Colts' ability to spend, or whether it's ability or choice, to spend money beyond the salary cap to bring in players and invest more heavily. When I was talking to a lot of Colts guys before this season, we were kind of previewing what it might look like next year, and there were higher expectations this year. So my thought was they will be faced with a choice. They're either going to have a successful season and they will have to decide whether they want to turn some things over and maybe take a step back, or make that further financial investment to bring a lot of these guys back that they traditionally wouldn't. Well, now clearly looks like that decision is probably made just based on the way that the season has played out. But what are your thoughts briefly on Chris Ballard his ability to spend, his ability to get guys in when hamstrung by the fact that they don't spend that much money.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting. They'll usually pay for their own guys. You've seen them like Quentin Nelson got the big deal this offseason, and Shaq Leonard the year before that. But they really have been hesitant to give that big money to outside free agents. I think that's really evident at left tackle. I mean, that's a situation where this year you came in with Matt Pryor, I think had 2 starts there, and then a third round pick in Bernard Raymond. And it's been a big problem for this team. I mean, you want to point at areas of improvement. That's right there with long-term quarterback in terms of what they need to do to get better. And I think there's been a lot of talk on the beat. You know, why exactly are they unwilling to kind of give that big guaranteed money in free agency? Are they unable to do it? Is it just something that they're against that philosophically? You know, we're going to have to see. I think that's where this offseason, if Chris Ballard's back, is going to be really interesting, because once again, for like the 3rd or 4th year in a row, you need a long-term left tackle. You need that future quarterback, and you probably would like to add a pass rusher to go with Kwity Paye. When he's healthy, he's had a great year, and that looks like another good pick for him. But that other side, you're still waiting to kind of have that bookend. Yannick Ngakoue has done a good job this year, but he's not. I don't think he's the long-term answer over there. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if they're willing to go out and spend a little bit. Really, like you said, this franchise, even before Chris Ballard, that's not been their MO. You know, they've not been big players in free agency. But I feel like there's a couple spots right now. When you have 3 key positions to fill in the same offseason, you're not going to do all of it in the draft.
Yeah, well, 100%. And we know, so it's not just their unwillingness to spend in free agency. I mean, like you said, they're willing to give out a big contract to their own players, but generally speaking, they're not prorating any of that money. So they're not making any effort to free up cap space. They're riding the cap or even underspending and not making the effort to add. I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of money in free agency on one guy. You can do what teams like the Jets did or teams like the Eagles did, where most of those contracts are, mid to lesser tier, but you're spending a lot overall to get a bunch of talented guys in, right? So if the argument is that we don't necessarily trust an outside guy to give him that kind of money, well, you don't have to do that and still spend a lot of money and improve your team. Colts have not done that. And I really do think it's an ideological thing from the top down. So I just think that's something that Ballard will always be faced with having to handle, and that's a tough situation to straddle. I think if Jeff Saturday does a good enough job, he could potentially save Chris Ballard's job and make the roster, appear better than it did when Frank Reich was there. And, again, there's a lot of reasons for that, but we'll see. Just with your feeling on the quarterback situation, how do you think that they're going to try and handle that going forward? Because that's kind of the final thing. Matt Ryan, I don't know if I'd want to be back if I was Matt Ryan. I'd be like, all right, guys, that was a rough last season. I'm going to call it a career. He certainly could and be well respected. But what do you think the Colts will try and do?
Yeah, I think ideally, if you can convince Matt Ryan to come back, which I think is a big if, I think a lot of that depends on how this season finishes too. I think ideally you'd have him go one more year, but either way, you want to draft that guy probably, I would think, this April. Whoever it's going to be that you're building and you're going to turn this over to. I think the ideal situation would be to have Matt Ryan here to kind of, get you through that season, mentor this guy, let him come along at a slower pace, because you're definitely not going to have the number 1 overall pick. You're probably not going to have somebody you can just throw in right away and feel like you can get back to those playoff expectations. So I think they might have a little bit of a sell job on their hands with Matt Ryan, whoever the head coach is, to kind of say, this is what it's going to look like. Come back, one final ride kind of a situation. We're going to fix that left tackle spot. You've got some promising young receivers. We're going to build on that, give you basically what we promised you a year ago and weren't able to deliver. I think whoever the head coach is, that's going to be one of their priorities. But I do think it's time to go find that guy in the draft, whoever that may be, and start building for the long-term future.
So, Kyron, let me ask you this. Just based on your feeling of the offensive line available around the league, if the Colts do decide that they need to draft a quarterback in this upcoming draft, do you feel like Bernard Raymond is a guy that you can go into next season with expecting development, or do you feel like you've got to shore up that position somehow? And if so, who would they potentially go after to fill that spot?
No, I don't think he's somebody that can develop into a starting level NFL player. That's just my opinion. I think, the question is that when have we ever seen that happen? A guy that's just been pretty bad to below average, and he's not even below average. I'm shooting a bell right now. He's been pretty bad, right? So how many times have we ever seen a guy develop into a solid to good player after that? I can't really think of anybody. I mean, George Fant struggled heavily when he first came in, but he was a basketball player.
Totally different situation.
Too, and he's 10 times more athletic. I mean, it's just he has more tools that you can work with. I'm trying to, find a way to shoot the guy some bail here, but I just don't see it. So, long story short, I don't see it. And free agency. I mean, maybe an Orlando Brown Jr. I mean, he's not the greatest, but he has been a Pro Bowler consistently. I hate as an offensive lineman, I hate the term pressure. Like, did you give up the sack or not? Did you get beat bad enough to give up the sack or not? He doesn't really give up too many sacks. I think he's given up 2 this entire year. It's been 10 games. He would definitely be a significant upgrade. Even if you can go get a guy like Jack Conklin, he doesn't necessarily. Maybe you can bump. It's tough. There's guys though that you can work with more than what they have now.
What about George Fant? Because he's a guy who has improved. He's going to be like 31. So by offensive tackle years, not that old. Been injured this year, but he'll probably be much more cost efficient than a guy like Brown, I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, but also like you can't. We just talked about it, kind of the injury, and George Fant ain't going to be cheap. Let's be honest about that. He's not going to be cheap. Definitely cheaper than Orlando Brown, but I think over the course of the life of that contract, you would get more for spending the money on Orlando Brown than you would a George Fant. And I don't know the draft pick situation, but there's a lot of tackles in this upcoming draft. I think there's much more probability that you find a guy second, third round. Let's say a Tyler Steen from Alabama, a guy like him that could go play left tackle. Somebody's going to fall in the draft. I think that Paris Johnson Jr. maybe could fall into the second round. Some of these guys that are fringe first round guys. There's a much higher chance of you finding a very good player in the draft than going to find a guy in free agency for the price you have to pay for him.
Okay. All right. Cool. That'll be something.
One more point, though. It's funny you were talking about spending the money. It was like the Colts haven't necessarily had to or felt like they had to because they haven't been a bad franchise. They've been pretty middle of the road where you feel like, oh, we can work it out. Next year it'll be different. Next year they'll be good enough. So they haven't been bad enough for them to really have to go all out and sell. They've been just good enough. I mean, like they were a fringe playoff team last year. They won that Jacksonville game last year. They're in the playoffs. They've just been just good enough to be competitive, and they're in a favorable division where it's like, you know what, next year Jags aren't. We don't have to worry about the Texans. So they've been just good enough to where they don't feel like they have to spend that money, which I think is not the right thing. But that's
giving them too much credit, man. It's giving them too much credit, in my opinion, because all you have to do is look at the track record over many, many years, and they've always operated in the same way. Even the teams that have been good have still gone out and spent to stay competitive. You look at teams like the Chiefs. You look at these teams that are very talented and have owned their division for years. They still go out and spend because their finances and ideology tell them they can. So I don't mean to cut you off, but I hear you, but you're giving them too much credit, I think.
I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm just saying that's a lot of the logic behind it. Like when you're competitive enough, it's like, okay, we can get by with this because we've always gotten by with this. That's kind of, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but it's just funny how it goes. Because Irsay, the first thing he said in that press conference was, over the last 20 years, we were like number 4 in winning percentage. We've been very and he's not lying. I mean, they literally are. They're just good enough. So it's just kind of funny the thought process.
Largely due to Jeff Saturday and Peyton Manning. But all right, George, I'm going to let you go here real soon. I want to give you the opportunity to comment on anything that I have not asked you about that you feel like is highly relevant to the current Colts and immediately future Colts situation.
Yeah, I think you guys have done a really good job of covering a lot of what's going on. I think one of the biggest, I don't want to call it a surprise, but one of the biggest benefits for this team this year and one of the most interesting situations moving forward is Gus Bradley. He's come in with that defense, and they've really been a playoff caliber defense all year long. But you wonder, what's his future? Is the new head coach able to retain him? Do you get to start all over again on that side of the ball? I've been really impressed with the fact that they haven't had Shaquille Leonard except for a handful of snaps. And this defense has been pretty consistent. I mean, yeah, they let down at the end of the game yesterday, but you give Jalen Hurts that many chances, he's going to cash in at some point. You can't ask your defense to do that, for 60 minutes. I think that's going to be another element of this offseason. It's going to be really interesting. Who is that head coach, and is he able to retain Gus Bradley? Because I think doesn't get a lot of national recognition because of the record this team has right now. I think he's done a really, really good job on that side of the ball.
Yeah, defensively, I'm curious to see how that shakes out too, because I know Isaiah Rodgers has been kind of a nice up-and-comer for them, but on the other side, a big part of their success is how well Stephon Gilmore's played, and corner is such a volatile position, and at his age, it would just be really hard for me to expect that, to count on that next year as well. So corner is something they probably have to consider in the team-building process too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
George, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. I had a really nice conversation. Please let everybody know where they can find your work, where they can follow you on social media, and hopefully we get you back on. I will say our producer, Noah Ashley, is a big Colts fan, so I know he has been absolutely stoked. He follows you, and he's hyped to have you on the show and follow along as well. But let everybody know, please, where they can find you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to be here. I'm at Twitter, at GM Bremer. Most of my stuff is at heraldbulletin.com, and you can also go to the Odyssey, Apple, all the places you can go to get your podcast, The Blue Horseshoe, with myself and Ryan Hickey from CBS Radio.
Beautiful. All right, George, we'll catch you again next time, hopefully the offseason, to kind of talk about what the Colts decide to do with how they ultimately shake out. All right, man. We'll see you then.
Thanks a lot.
All right, Kyron. Good show. We can call it a day, or we can talk about the Chargers coaching staff. I'm going to throw it to you. What do you want to do here?
The Chargers coaching staff sucks. Next. That's it. They suck, man. They're just bad. Like, there's nothing really to talk about there. Same thing we've been saying all year. Poor game management, poor situational play calling. They're really doing. They've had a little bit of injury bad luck, and that's going to bail them out for another year. Justin Herbert's just good enough to keep them hovering around 500, where they'll be in the mix. That's going to keep them around another year. But simply put, they're just not very good. If they were just even above average, this team would be sitting at 7-3, at worst 6-4. They're costing them ball games, and it's actually pretty sad to see. I would hate for Justin Herbert to turn into the new Dan Marino, where he has this otherworldly career. He makes all these incredible plays, these incredible throws, puts up the most gaudy numbers you've ever seen, and they never do anything in the playoffs or have a significant title run because of the ineptitude of the coaching staff and just the system around him. So I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about there, but hopefully cooler heads prevail. They take their lump on the chin like men, and they move on from this. I just don't foresee it happening. I think they'll get another year, maybe another 2 years, because they're hovering around, like we just talked about with the Colts, just good enough to be in the conversation. And Justin Herbert's just good enough and just young enough where you can hold out hope, and I think they'll get more opportunities because of that.
All right. That'll do it for us today, Kyron. Let everybody know where they can find you and all of your work, and we will potentially see you on this coming Sunday. And if not, certainly this coming Monday to recap the weekend of games.
Yeah, just follow me right there. You see it on the screen, at Kyron Samuels on Twitter. And then you'll get everything else, all my other streams, all my other platforms that I'm doing work with, and my schedule from there. We'll be doing a little bit of action tomorrow night on the Playback app. So come watch some action with me, and we'll have a pretty eventful week with this World Cup and playoff week. We're doing a bunch of stuff with other sports as well. So just follow me there at Kyron Samuels on Twitter, and we'll see you guys pretty soon.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. We'll be back this Thursday. The plan is to do a big Thanksgiving special. Hopefully, we'll be doing this every single year. We'll see. But I'm going to try and have guests for every single matchup on Thursday. So that's the plan. We shall see exactly who we have. Some guys are in the books working on some other ones. But we will see you then.
Shout out to Noah, baby.
This podcast is brought to you by Gridiron Heroics Media.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.